It's really interesting seeing the attempt uh, at subverting the success of modern Zelda games. As everyone knows, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are actually the two highest selling Zelda games ever. So anyone who tries to gaslight you into thinking Tears of the Kingdom bombed is completely deluding himself. These games are huge, and for good reason, because these are the best open world games ever made by far. And right now we're in this weird phase where people are delusionally denying the fact, Skyrim was better. But the reality is very clear: is that the template for open world games has been set, and Nintendo has already produced a number of high quality entries with this concept. Not only with the sequels of Tears of the Kingdom and Echoes of Wisdom, which are both completely different from one another, but also in other series, including Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and Xenoblade Chronicles X. Nintendo is dominating the open world space right now, so it's really easy to forget in the Wii era, where one of the primary complaints about the Wii console was the lack of open world games. That's right. When Skyward Sword came out, all anybody could do was sit there and bitch about how it was an open world. Like, no, nobody wants this. Nobody wants the motion controls. Nobody wants this world design. Nobody likes the puzzles. Like, oh, like it's too kiddie. Like it's really easy for people to just kind of brush off what happened with Skyward Sword. One of the best Zelda games ever made, this great evolution of the 3D Zelda formula, dismissed by the masses for very petty reasons. Rather similarly to like what's currently going on with Mario and Luigi Brothership, and what would you later go on with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and No More Heroes 3, right? Like, for whatever reason, people are completely obsessed with criticizing Nintendo games no matter what. So when it comes to the transition from classic to modern Zelda, well, I should say Ocarina style Zelda to Breath of the Wild style Zelda, right? It was a really well implemented move, right? It felt like Zelda, it was Zelda, it evolved the formula in a good, exciting way, but people had to try and find something to complain about with it. And fundamentally, there's really nothing to complain about when it comes to Breath of the Wild. So people had to make up all sorts of nonsense. The weapon durability system, the story, and of course, like the open world design. The narrative for Breath of the Wild was that people missed. They wanted classic Zelda. They wanted the dungeons and the structure and the items. Please don't realize that The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is nothing but items that you can utilize in a variety of different ways that are way more flexible than any previous Zelda game. Like those aren't real items, guys. Like, people made up complaints in order to try and pass themselves off as like critics, trying to make it seem as if Breath of the Wild was deeply flawed because no, we're never going to get old style Zelda games ever again. Yeah, never mind that they immediately re-released Link's Awakening in a couple of years later. Like, never mind the re-release of Skyward Sword. Never mind like the NSO stuff where all that stuff is readily available. Like, you cannot gaslight me into thinking that you've played all these Zelda games because I know you haven't. And that's very apparent with a lot of these people. But this seems to be a trend, right? And I'm noticing this now with Mario and Luigi Brothership, where people will try and make it seem as if the originals were so good that there was no improving on them, and all the changes that new entries made have lessened the product, right? Mario and Luigi Brothership, right? What's happened with that one is that it takes a more traditional JRPG route where like you have all these towns and all these communities and all these characters. Instead of like the really fast-paced, brisk pacing of older games, it's like a giant 40-hour long adventure, right? So some people are trying to cry about the usage of established Mushroom Kingdom characters, the focus on like the world of Concordia, the environments, the puzzles, the combat, the battle plugs, the bros moves. Like they're going to all these links to try and denounce the game. When you really take a look at what it is, you'll find that for the most part, Mario and Luigi Brothership is by far the best Mario and Luigi game ever made, right? It's really not even close, right? All the decisions they made, all the changes they made were really good and really smart, right? They really knew what they were doing when they put this game together. They evolved the Mario and Luigi series. They didn't repress it. They didn't like strip away things that people liked for no reason, right? There are reasons that Brothership is made the way it is. And the same could be said for the newer Zelda games, right? People felt that the open world design of games like Twilight Princess were too limiting, and so Nintendo revolutionized the concept with Breath of the Wild. This is not a complicated concept. And yet, for some reason, people feel the need to create this narrative that Nintendo is deliberately like stripping away things that they liked and that we're never going to get classic Zelda ever again. It's just a gigantic cope. It really is. And it's honestly one of the most disgusting, like nefarious things I think I've seen ever from the community because it really demonstrates something I've been saying for a long time is that these people will never be happy with anything, right? They will absolutely obsess over the smallest things and try to find something to complain about, right? Especially when it comes to like these really well received, really high quality titles. You know, how many people did I see who got angry at the singing piranha plants in Mario Wonder? Like, oh, I can't take that seriously. I'm a grown man. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, you just it's it's absurd. You know, seeing like the coping and the seething in regards to these newer games and this assurance from the community that like the Switch is on the way out. Like we're constantly seeing this over and over and over again, and it just really needs to be understood that this is unreasonable. The way people are acting, their obsession with keeping things the exact same, like their inability to acknowledge when things have changed, right? You know, you see them talking about the old Zelda style while completely ignoring that Zelda 1 and 2 were completely different from later games, right? Like, I know people who cry about Zelda 2 never getting a proper sequel. So like when you look at it from that perspective, the idea that classic Zelda uh, not coming back is a problem is just completely laughable. Like it just comes off as if people are looking for a reason to complain. And when you really realize that, like you learn not to respect any of these people's opinions. With Echoes of Wisdom, I think this specific release really debunked a lot of the notions that people had about this idea that classic Zelda would never return. You know, they thought we would never get dungeons again and we would never get item usage again and we'd be very limited in what we can do, like narratively and stuff like that. But Echoes of Wisdom debunked a lot of that, because of the way it works, because of its usage of old characters, its adherence to the lore, right? Echoes of Wisdom addressed a lot of like petty complaints that people had with Tears of the Kingdom. And people are having problems like adjusting to it. So when they try like criticizing Echoes of Wisdom, their complaints end up coming off as rather flat, because we saw what they were doing right after Tears of the Kingdom came out. They were assuring us that we would never get a top-down Zelda ever again, and then we get one, and then it comes out 3 months later, and now they're trying to like backtrack it. Well, what I actually mean is that like we're never gonna get one where you play as Link again. It's just like, what? Like, who are you trying to fool? Like, Really. When the narrative changes this often, it is completely impossible to take it seriously.